I feel like a lot of folks are, will run out and hire a traditional partnerships professional, somebody that's got a history of doing partnerships and things like that. And I couldn't disagree with that approach more. It's not the right attitude. Getting pipeline is nothing more than sales motions. You can hire a junior commercial AE or an SDR with 1 year of experience, put them in a partnerships role, develop the right, co-sell playbooks, and go prove that this can be done. And once you've proven it over and over and you see repeatability, then you can hire, a partnership professional to help you scale. Demos very rarely push a deal forward in any material way. There's really three types of value that anyone can ever sell. And you're either fixing something, you're preventing something, or you're improving something.
Hello and welcome back once again to the Inquisitor podcast with me, Marcus Cauchi. Today my guest is Alex Buckle, who's the CEO of Forecastable. Forecastable helps in the area of distribution, channels, partnerships. And today what we're going to do is we're really going to dig deep into why people talk about partnerships, but they really don't know how to make them produce. I see founders, leaders, and even partnership professionals have one shared problem, which is distribution without fantasy. We're going to get real about it, and partnerships are not magic. They're real life motion, and what we're going to show is what works, what fails, and why. So without any further ado, Alex, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Marcus.
Excellent. Well, could you start with 60 to 90 seconds on who you are and what qualifies you to talk about this subject?
Sure. So for everyone listening, my name is Alex Buckle, CEO and co-founder of Forecastable. As Marcus mentioned, we're a professional services company, and all we do every single day is stand up partner programs and co-sell programs that produce pipeline. So our only measure of success is pipeline production in our business. In terms of background, I have a pretty non-traditional background. I've never actually held a partnerships role, which is interesting now that I have a very niche business focused on nothing but partnerships. But I've spent the last 20 years in enterprise sales, small companies, large companies, software startups. I've, been in the SAP ecosystem, the Adobe ecosystem. I've run and exited, two professional services companies, all done, through co-selling. And that's essentially it. I mean, it's just very, very sales focused. And I figured out very early on in my career that the reps that I wanted deal flow from, in particular in the SAP world, where I first learned this, those SAP reps were not going to give me a single shred of attention or deal flow if I wasn't doing something for them and adding value to their lives. And so I just got really, really good at getting pipeline and deal flow from partners, and now we do it for a living.
Excellent. That's a really good basis. So let's start out with what are the blind spots that sales organizations typically have relating to partnerships, and why do they persist?
Sure. The blind spots are actually really large in most sales organizations because most sales organizations, and I'd venture to say, 99%. I mean, it is such a gap in market. Most sales organizations have no idea how to source pipeline from partners. And so there's a lot of, especially upmarket sellers that are used to working with partners, meaning that they're used to having a systems integrator that might be in on their deal or doing implementations and things like that. But it was never really taught, and it was never taught to me in my career either. How do you leverage your partner network or your ecosystem to actually start deals? And you can't just show up and ask them for referrals and say, hey, can you just introduce me to this person all the time? Like there's got to be a what's in it for them to make it a real co-sell motion. And so the biggest blind spot the sales reps have is they just don't know how to get that pipeline, if I had to say it right there.
I agree 100%. I'd go one step further, which is I think many direct sales organizations see their partner channel as competition.
Yes, they could see it as competition, and they see it as fluff. Like nobody, they can see it as competition if there's a direct sale model and a channel model, and there could be conflict there. But they also view it as fluffy and not serious. Like there's not a single sales leader that I know and I know a lot of sales leaders that is banking on partner sourced revenue to hit their quota. It's always viewed as a nice to have, and oh, if I get it, great bonus. But they don't bank on it because it's never been reliable in the past.
Well, the data on partner-led or partner-with sales
Yeah.
is really instructive. The average initial order value is 70% higher. The deal cycles tend to be shorter. There
Yes.
are a significantly higher number of referrals that come out of it, something like 3x, and that means expansion sales. And it generally is driven by the fact that partners already have established relationships with the customer.
Yep.
And direct sales organizations are obsessed with top of the funnel, cold outreach, which is interruptive, and it has about a 1 in 23 win rate. When you are referred, even without training, you're going to get about a 1 in 6 win rate.
Yeah.
You have a higher initial order value, but your margins are higher because your cost of sale is less. And with a partner, if you treat them correctly, you then don't end up with that middle of the funnel constipation and bloat in the same way, and fewer surprises at the end. I was talking to a client of mine, and one of his prospects has a 20% win rate at final stage after commit. Now, that's an
Wow.
80% failure rate. Now, that's obscene. And any
Yes.
CFO, any board, any investor should probably be having kittens at the thought of that, but that's quite normal.
Yep. Wholeheartedly agree.
So, what other blind spots are you seeing at a leadership level around partnership?
At the leadership level, I feel like there's a couple different things to chat about there depending on size of company. At the leadership level, if let's say you're sub 150 employees, you maybe haven't hired that first partnerships person yet. You know that partnerships are important. Every analyst is telling you that you need to go and do partnerships. I feel like a lot of folks will run out and hire a traditional partnerships professional, somebody that's got a history of doing partnerships and things like that. And I couldn't disagree with that approach more. It's not the right attitude. It's not the right approach because what you're going to end up with is with a traditional partnerships professional is you're going to end up with a 6 month infrastructure build. Oh, let's go build some relationships. Let's get a PRM in place. Let's go figure out our deal registration process. Like all of those things are not important. The only thing that's important is proving the viability and repeatability of getting pipeline in the door. And getting pipeline is nothing more than sales motions. You can hire a junior commercial AE or an SDR with 1 year of experience, put them in a partnerships role, develop the right, co-sell playbooks, and go prove that this can be done. And once you've proven it over and over and you see repeatability, then you can hire, a partnership professional to help you scale. But I think for smaller companies, that's a blind spot.
I'm going to take slight issue in that it's not just about putting pipeline in, it's about putting the right pipeline in. And this is one of my huge bugbears because I think there are so many sales and go-to-market organizations that are obsessed with filling the top of the funnel. But what that does is it focuses on activity and volume. It doesn't focus on quality and momentum. And the net result of that is that you end up with essentially a load of crap in the middle, and that then gets constipated. And most of the activity is then based around either trying to add more rubbish at the top or to try and unblock it. Well,
Yeah.
if 80% of your time is spent chasing people who shouldn't have been in the pipeline in the first place, that means that you are operating with one valve instead of five in your engine. And
Yep.
that's massively ineffective. So let's take a step back and look at how a well-designed partnership approach involves marketing, it involves customer success, it involves sales, all contributing to the build of how we go to market through partners.
Absolutely. I missed the question there. What was it? Was there a specific question there?
Yeah, how do we engineer the build where
Ah,
all those different functions that contribute to go to market actually help the partner manager, whoever it is, preferably someone without partnership experience, based on your summary, um, put together a proposition that is appealing to the partner, because now you've got three parties in the relationship. You have the customer who is at the heart. Around them, you have the partners, and then you have the vendor, and all of those needs need to be met, and there has to be a win for everybody. So how do we engage all those different functions so that we're working as one and collaborating with the partner so that we're setting partners up for success?
absolutely. So you touched on a few different things there. One, wholeheartedly agree that qualified pipeline is really important. You just want, like you said, you just don't want to put a bunch of rubbish at the top. It's a waste of everyone's time. It's not good for anybody. And so, we definitely don't want just random pipeline. And to your second point about how do you go build out this organization to go support the partnerships department? Now we're getting into larger companies. A lot of those smaller companies don't have those different departments and things like that. But when we get into the larger organizations, and how do you deliver value to the partner as well? We do that through one-to-one interviews. So for every single playbook, like everything we do starts with a co-sell playbook, and a co-sell playbook is it's not it's very focused. It's focused on one motion, selling one thing typically into a very clearly defined ICP. And so when we go through that playbook, and what I do is when we're building that, I do an interview between the partners, and then we start asking. There's there's actually no better way to produce a co-sell playbook than doing a live interview. A lot of folks try to merge one pagers and marketing's trying to support in some weird way. When at the end of the day, let's say as an example, we're working with a SaaS company. Let's say it's a large CRM company, and they want to go impact, net new acquisition in financial services. First thing I'll do is I'll go and find a systems integrator that they already trust. Like I'll ask the question, hey, which professional services company or SI is like the most trusted, the expert in financial services, within the organization? They usually have an answer right on the tip of their tongue. They already know who that is. Great. Let's go grab that person. Let's get them into a room and let's conduct an interview. Now, in that interview, I'll start rooting out, hey, what's your unique expertise? What is it that you do differently in financial services than anyone else? And then we start creating what we call the co-sell door opener. And that is where we encourage strongly that we create an experience to invite the prospect or the customer into. So as an example, let's say it's Salesforce and it's a Salesforce AE. We might tell that AE in this specific situation, hey, here's a ghostwritten communication. I want you to write your prospect and let them know that that Salesforce is investing really heavily in financial services this year, and our partner, systems integrator company A, has created this experience, and we've actually it's $5,000 for the experience, but Salesforce is going to cover it, and we each get to nominate 3 accounts, so it's very, very limited. Would you like a seat or access to this? And if not, would you mind letting me know so I can give it to another customer or prospect? Now, whatever that experience is, it's got to be something that's high value, that the buyer feels like it's almost worth paying for. And it creates a very different type of engagement and conversation with a prospect or customer than just going out there and trying to get a discovery call. Like it's all about the door opening experience. And so to your point, when you were at your initial question, when you're asking about what does that build look like behind them, it is about manufacturing from my perspective. It is all about creating a machine that manufactures co-sell playbooks for every area of the business for which you want to impact, which could be net new acquisition, upsell, cross-sell, retention, like churn reduction. There's plays you can create for all of them. And that's the process.
So you've touched on 2 really important factors which are transferable into direct sales as well. The partner in this case is your customer. Customer interviews, absolutely critical. Almost no one really does them. And they don't do them on the basis of jobs to be done. They tend to do MPS type of interviews. And that's essentially people just pandering to your ego, not really delivering real value. And the second thing is lead with value, not a pitch. Give them something that creates reciprocity in their brain, and they're going to find timely, they're going to find relevant, and they're going to find personally valuable, and associate a cost with it, and have them feel like they're gaining something. They've got a bargain out of it, and what they're buying is, what you're buying is their attention by providing them with this resource or access to this resource.
Yeah.
So those are 2 really critical takeaways that anybody can apply, whether you're in a direct or partnerships role. So at what point do we pull the trigger and decide, if we're in the sub 150 headcount mark, that we should be going for partnerships? And do we really need to wait that long?
No, you don't need to wait that long. I would do it as early on as possible. I have other ventures that I get into as well outside of Forecastable, and when I start a new venture, I tend to think partnerships first. And there's a myth out there that you know that you need to nail your direct selling motion before you can go and you need to sell your own product first before you can have somebody else sell it. And that's just not true. It's logical to think like that. But at the end of the day, distribution is all that matters. You don't even have to have the greatest product or the best product or the most features. If you have distribution, you win, and that's all that really matters. Now, of course, if your product sucks, then eventually you'll have churn and all that good stuff. But I tend to find distribution first. And if I had to make recommendations to anyone out there, it's like build to the gaps in market. Whether it's a service or it's a product, and think through the lens of partnerships first. Like, what can you do to solve problems for a Salesforce or ServiceNow or Databricks and Snowflake? And if you can go and solve a problem that they have, and you know that it's prevalent in a lot of their customer accounts, then like just do that. And when you build a relationship with that partner, you're going to get distribution because you're solving a problem for them as well. It works every single time as long as your value story is solid and there's a strong what's in it for me for all parties.
So if you are going partnerships first,
Yeah.
have a functional product that does the job. It doesn't have to be perfect.
Yeah.
And address an unmet need, a space of unidentified demand, adjacent need. So what do you make possible that is currently impossible without you? So if you're selling into Salesforce or ServiceNow, what are the
Yeah.
gaps that their customers complain about, where you can have a marked impact on adding value to Salesforce or to ServiceNow or to whoever, and enhance the value of their proposition? That seems to me to be an obvious way of going about things, but for some reason, no one else seems to think that way.
And it's easy to figure out those gaps too. I mean, obviously, if you're, have some unique expertise, hopefully you've got a background. Let's say it's Snowflake. So hopefully you've got a background using Snowflake if you're a services provider or a product builder. But all you need to do is get on with a couple of customer success managers or account executives from that organization. So individual contributors, straightforward to get in touch with them, and just ask them, hey, what are you hearing every single day? Where's the biggest gaps? Where do you lose deals? Where do you struggle the most? What are the biggest complaints? And you do a few interviews, it becomes obvious pretty quickly.
Okay, so you're trying to work out who makes a good partner. You can speak to the vendor and you can ask who their trusted partners are. However, if you're setting up on your own and you are trying to make head or tail of, what makes a great partner, what are the qualities that one looks for in a great partner organization and the specific individual who is going to be the person who's going to be your point of contact within the partner?
Sure. On the what makes a great partner side, like the first pass is all about, is this going to be a symbiotic relationship? Does this partnership solve a challenge that I have as a company? Now that could be a number of different things like we chatted about earlier. Do I have churn problems? Maybe I need to engage with a services organization that specializes in a particular area and, insert them into my accounts where I know I've got churn risk. Do I am I struggling to get, net new logos in a specific vertical? Let me go find a partner that dominates in that vertical, whether it's services or it could be a product in some cases. And let's go build a true co-sell motion where we leverage their expertise or network to get into that vertical. What could also be another good partner is maybe somebody who's sitting on a ton of your ICP as customers already. And so maybe you've got an integration with, doesn't matter, insert product company A, and product company A has 1,500 customers that meet your ICP already, and your integration, adds a lot of value to their lives. Then that's a good reason to partner with that company. But you've got to have a motion that allows them that, if you're going to partner with somebody like that, you've got to have a motion in place, a co-sell playbook that gets them to introduce you to their customers in a value-added type of way. They're not just going to do it just because you have an integration. There's got to be something of value that they're giving to their customer. Um, Now that's just a little bit on like first pass of of partner selection. You don't want to just go out there and randomly sign contracts and partner agreements. The second portion of your question was around the individual. Um, I call them hustlers. Like I kick them out as that's a disqualification factor for me in our own sales cycles when somebody comes on, gets on an initial discovery call with me, and they're just viewing it as a pure numbers game. Yeah, yeah, I want to go sign partnerships, and yeah, pipeline will appear, and they're just hustling their way through. They're not putting or willing to put like they even rush my discovery at times, and that's I'm like, okay, I'm not gonna you're gonna if you're this bad right now, you're gonna be a pain in the ass when it comes to being a customer, and you're not gonna do the things that I want you to do or that you need to do as part of our program, so we just don't deal with it. um and so in that front, like I've seen it before even with their own customers where they get somebody on that just wants to sign and says they're going to do a bunch of things and they don't deliver. So avoid the hustlers, avoid the people that you feel like don't have self accountability and aren't actually going to deliver, and just don't fool yourself in that regard.
So I've just recently posted something controversial, which is that do we really need to qualify? And I think part of the problem here is that qualification is this the right customer for me? Whereas, in fact, in my understanding of the way humans actually make decisions, buyers don't really give a damn about your band qualification criteria. What they really care about is this a safe decision for me to make?
Yeah.
And what I don't see often enough is putting the customer at the heart of the sales motion. And as a result, what they're trying to do is force customers through their gated funnel. And we both know that the buyer's process is not linear. It's messy. It's more like a bowl of spaghetti. And they come in and out. They're all the different stakeholders are operating at different paces. There are different centers of dissatisfaction, different levels of risk appetite. And if we remove the emphasis on trying to qualify them to fit our BANT or MEDIC criteria and tick the box on our gated CRM system, we can then focus on what the buyer is trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
And the partners are generally much better placed to understand that, especially if they've been with that customer for a while.
Yeah.
So, what would you say is different in a really solid partnership sales motion that differs from a classic cold new business direct motion?
Um, what differs is that's a great question because it is different and it is difficult to articulate. So I feel like in a direct sales motion, there's a lot of just selling to. And to your point, it's like I see a lot of reps that are trying to shove people through their qualification methodology, and it real instead of going out there and truly value selling, rooting out the pain, that rooting out the priorities, like rooting out all that stuff, and then driving some type of engagement towards a meaningful cycle. At which point you can qualify so you can forecast accurately. Um, but at least for what we do in partnerships, I can't say this for every partnerships organization. For what we do in partnerships, it is very, very focused on the qualification aspect. Like our co-sell playbooks that we develop, they contain the account identification criteria, ICP criteria, trigger events, like what are we hearing on our calls that would signal that this is the playbook to run for this particular situation. And we put high level of scrutiny on that co-sell door opener. So, it's that co-sell door opener is designed to be an engaging experience that is not just, hey, we want to go sell you something, get on a discovery call with me so I can shove you through a qualification methodology. It's that high value, come and engage with us, limited access, and it's got to be something that speaks to a pain, an acute pain that we know they're experiencing now. And there's really three types of value that anyone can ever sell. And you're either fixing something, you're preventing something, or you're improving something. It's like that's all anyone's ever really selling. And when we're building these co-sell door openers, we tend to focus on the fix. The fix is very transactional. It's like, I've got a toothache, let me go to the dentist and get that thing fixed. And don't try to sell me on some 1 year plan or talk to me about my future when I've got a raging toothache, right? That's very so like, can you find the raging toothache? Can you create an experience for your buyer that potentially gives them insights about that pain or how to fix it or help them fix it? And that's how we get people to the table. So it's very, very focused.
Okay, so that gets them to the table, but as most sales motions tend to then start trying to create momentum,
Yep.
often that timing isn't right for the buyer. And you've got all these different players at work within a complex deal. You've got the
Yep.
problem owner, you've got the risk owner, you've got the process owner, you've got influencers who are vying for the same budget. I interviewed Carl Schmidt recently, and he talked about a really interesting case where a medical devices rep had complete buy-in from the surgeon, and it was going to absolutely solve a bunch of clinical problems. It could generate revenue, but then it got to the allocation committee, and the CMO killed the deal. And he said it turns out that the biggest problem that we really have is that our patients are coming to the hospital, but it takes 10 or 15 minutes for them to park. And for A&E, that can be life or death. So actually, we don't need a new device. What we need is a car park. And the problem is that because vendors and salespeople have a tendency to think, I've got a product, I have to sell it, I've got to make my quota, they're not paying attention to the second and third room. Now, in terms of partnering, I think we also need to see the customer as our partner. They're not the customer, they're somebody that we should be on the same team with. And what I don't see is a lot of that happening in sales or even in channel sales,
Agreed.
because there, there is a transactional pressure from within the supply side, within the vendor organization. So, what have you seen working in order to help slow things down so that we're more aligned and we get the buyer to come out of the goal mouth? So it's us and them kicking into an open goal against their problem rather than creating this adversarial buyer-seller relationship.
Sure. Now you're speaking my language. I love complex deals, large buying committees. There's a wrench that can get thrown into your gears at every angle if you don't watch out for your blind spots. I always assume I have blind spots. I tend to scrutinize my own deals, like, and figure out who's going to get me. And like, if you're always looking out for risks, you tend to get really great results. Now, to answer your question though, so one, like when it comes to partner selling, if we're really working a deal together, and as part of our co-sell playbooks, we create what's called a co-sell plan. And a co-sell plan is nothing more than a mutual action plan or mutual success plan, but through the lens of the co-sell motion. And it really defines order of operations and qualification. So order of operations is going to be, all right, in this particular motion, who's doing discovery? When are we doing demo? Who does what first? So we're not jumping the gun and having reps from different companies communicating out of turn with the buyer. So step number one is to have a co-sell plan. Now, getting reps to use the plans. I mean, it's hard enough to get them to use their own mutual action plans. So like, we've had to build a lot of process in the background to help account for the lack of use in co-sell plans. Um, and then two, it's all about relationship maps. And so what we do is on our side, when we've got a customer who is who's co-selling and working in particular mid-market or enterprise deals, and it's expected that the deals are always going to be worked jointly, then we build relationship maps for them. And relationship maps are just org charts that indicate kind of who's a supporter, who's an opponent, who's my economic buyer, where do we have executive alignment, and it gives a single view of the buying committee that everybody can align around. Because in a co-sell motion, you might have 3 or 4 different companies in that motion. You've got that, which means you've got 3 to 4 different open opportunities and 3 to 4 different CRMs. And I guarantee you that there are probably 3 to 4 different close dates in those CRMs, that they're forecasting up to management. And so how do you create this? So the challenge is, how do you create a unified and accurate view of the deal, which includes the buying committee, relationship map, and the co-sell plan, which is a mutual action plan. And that's how we manage it.
Okay, so I'm going to come back to this concept of buyer safety again,
Sure.
because whilst I agree with everything that you've said so far, I think the intent is still an issue in most organizations, and that would go for any form of transactional vendor, whether it's the software manufacturer or their partners. And I think a good co-sell plan also needs to work out what are the risks that the individual players, and the research that Gartner and CB and Challenger came up with suggests that there is an average of 16. I interviewed a client of mine recently, and there were 42 participants in the decision over an 18-month period. Now, that's bloody complex.
Yes.
It requires cat herding skills of the highest ability. And
Yes.
any form of pressure or rushing is then going to cause the buyer organization to take the safe option, which is just to stall. And if we look at the data on actual pipelines, about 60% are lost to no decision.
Yep.
Now, if you've started a sales motion, that is a massive waste of time, money, resource. It's an opportunity cost. It affects margin, it affects CAC, it affects EBITDA, it affects your ability to forecast. But for some reason, it seems to be okay to continue that act of self-sabotaging idiocy. So, how do we get organizations to slow down and to actually rain check to find out what's going on and what the emotional state is of the buyer?
So you touched on a number of different things. So one is, you're right. When you've got that many members of the buying committee, it's like, for me at least, and it does take you are herding cats at that point, but it's about building those one-to-one relationships. I try to get down to the stakeholder level, like incentives. Like, why does this person care or not care? Do they have skin in the game? Are they just here checking the box? Are they going to go with the flow and just go with whatever the rest of the team decides? Or is there something they're vying for? Because usually there's a personal interest, whether it's professional interests, I want to do my job better, I want to get promoted, or it's something, personal, like super personal, like related to their career, that they want to get done. And then rooting out those individual stakeholder, requirements, is really, really important. Now, the no decision side of things, that, I've run into this in our own cycles, and it usually comes down to qualification. And in the qualification, it's rooting out the pain, and when do they need that pain solved by? So we've got, hey, if we don't solve this pain, by the end of Q2, what's the impact of that to the business? Is that something you're focusing on? Like, when do you need, like, we need to root out, when do they really need this solution? And that will tell you kind of where your cycle stands, I feel like, or from a timing perspective. And if you ruthlessly qualify that and ensure that leadership is aligned on solving that pain, then you don't typically end up with no decision. And at least in my experience.
Um, Again, I'm going to push back a little bit.
Sure.
I
Please.
think we have to understand that there is trouble today, pain. That's the push of the present.
Yep.
And it might be pressure, inefficiency, some non-compliance issue, missing targets, complaints from customers, whatever.
Yep.
There's the better future, and that has a pull effect. And that might be reducing friction, higher throughput, generating new revenue. But then there are two other forces at work. The force of anxiety of change. And more often than not, what I see sellers do is they say or do something, or fail to say or do something, that causes the other human being to imagine what it would be like after they've bought, and then thinking it goes wrong. And so they create future buyer's remorse as a memory.
Yep.
And there's that gravitational pull of inertia, which is the anxiety, the attachment to the present state. So, better to just stick with what we know. Better the devil you know than make the change. And so they stick with existing workflows, but you also have these emotional drivers, which are, the political capital that they might be expending.
Yep.
Is it safe for me to make this decision? There's the functional job, which is, will it get the job done and will it make things better? And then the personal and emotional is, am I going to make progress as a result? And so coming back to that process of qualification, I think we have to elevate qualification, if we're going to use that word, to a much deeper level, especially in complex sales, where making the change is strategic. And once it's in place, it's non-reversible.
Yep.
And so they are taking a massive risk. If they're talking six, seven, eight, nine, 10 figures, it could be their job.
Yep.
And hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of people could be affected.
Yep.
And they don't give a damn about your product or your service. They certainly don't care about your quota, and they care even less about your shareholder value.
Yep.
So, what is it that a good partner will push back on when the vendor is trying to rush things in order to try and make this quarter's quota?
You're saying if we have a partner who's trying to rush something in a deal, like we're in a co-sell
No, no,
motion, the
no.
partner's like,
You're the vendor, but the partner will push back because they say, actually, this is the wrong thing to do at this time, and how they would go about doing that so that you've actually got a partner as opposed to a co-conspirator, an accomplice.
um, so you touch on a number of different things, but one, I absolutely agree that they don't care about you as a vendor. Like if buyers could solve their problems without speaking to a single vendor and just write a check, they would. Like the fact is that they need to have vendors in order to solve the problems. And I think you're absolutely right. Buyer's safety, while solving pain, even if we could solve the pain, it's like that may not make the buyer feel safe, right? It is all about, at the end of the day, buyer's safety. And there's personal and professional things, emotional things that get put into that. To your point, the political capital, if I do this and it goes wrong, am I putting my career at risk? Am I putting my promotion at risk and things like that? And so for us, like at least how we account for that in our cycles, we price appropriately. Essentially, it's like we're very, very aligned and in tune with buyer pain and the options that are out there, and we've created the least expensive way for people to prove the viability of standing up co-sell motions. And whether it's a $5,000 playbook or it's a $30,000 pilot for something more aggressive, I know that that's the least riskiest option that they could possibly take, and that's why we win in our particular cycles. Now, to your question about, finding a partner that's willing to push back, that's not really at the partner level. That's more at the individual seller level, and it varies. You can get a partner that's great. You have lots of wins under your belt. They've got some, everything. You have lots of playbooks. You've got lots of co-sell plans. Things work out nicely. Or you get one, pushy AE who's got commission breath that can really ruin a deal. And so it's about the individual AE. And when I get in with an individual AE, it's about setting the tone for how we're going to do things. Hey, dude, we've got a co-sell plan. Here's what we're doing next. And if I smell that they're over communicating and things like that, or they're doing things that aren't good for the cycle, then I call it out early and say, hey, let's tap the brakes a bit here. Here's why. And so it's just about being mindful of the individual personalities in your partners.
Interesting. I think we need to look at the sale as an ecosystem or an organism, and all the different organs and systems within the body need to be healthy. And far too often, in most vendor organizations, they are siloed and they're all doing their very best.
Yep.
But often their incentives, how they are measured, how they're promoted, hired, fired, and recognized are at odds with one another. So again, coming back to the earlier question of how do you set yourself up to make sure that you are going to set your partners up to succeed? What does the vendor organization need to do in order to create that internal alignment first? Because it then speaks to how we go to market, how we qualify, how we engage, how we time our approach.
So to make the partner as successful as possible, it requires enablement, and it's not just like training or anything or things like that. So as an example, there's let's say I'm a professional services company and I'm operating, let's say, in the Databricks ecosystem, and I want to get the attention of all the sellers over there, and I want to start breaking into enterprise sales teams. Well, one, you got to have a couple wins under your belt. They don't just welcome you in for nothing. So get some wins. But two, when it comes to succeeding with partners and generating pipeline, it is all about the individual contributor. It's the front lines is where you're going to get all your referrals. And you're going to get them from sales, pre-sales, customer success, or account management. That's where you get the lion's share of your referrals. And so when we come in and we're teaching a customer how to go get that consistent pipeline, it is about one, getting to the frontline manager of the team that you want to impact and start doing business with in a meaningful, consistent way. And even though you know their pains, and because you're a great partner and you've had wins under your belt before, you know what their pains. It's about getting on a discovery call with that manager, and you don't call it a discovery call. I might say, "Hey, Marcus, um, we got great win, last week with Johnny. We knocked down a big deal. I think we can do a lot more of those, and I've got some ideas on how I can enable your team to drive more wins like that. Mind if I grab 15 minutes with you? Let me just get to know a little bit more about your team, your priorities, where they're winning, losing in this one particular area, and they very rarely does a meeting like that get turned down. And when you get in that meeting, we prep in detail for those meetings on what do we want to learn. We call learn, validate, commit. But what do we want to learn that we may not know today? We're just curious about. What do we want to validate in terms of maybe we have assumptions about our own value that we're going to deliver to their team? Like we want to validate that that's important to them and that's important to their team. And then the commit side of it is, let's say we get on that discovery call with that frontline manager. We learn all these things. We're jamming, and there's obviously a fit. Then I might ask the manager, I say, "Hey, Marcus, do you mind if I grab 15 minutes on one of your weekly team calls, and I'm going to go through a quick, 5 slides. I'm going to show your reps exactly how to identify these problems, how to leverage us, the ghost written copy, and fully enable them. It takes 15 minutes, and almost 100% of the time we get a yes on that meeting. And when you get in that room, it is about speaking to their pains and making it. Don't get in there and talk about how many offices you have and all the things that you can do. It's like, no. You're coming in here to solve a specific, because all that rep cares about is what they have going on in their accounts that month, that quarter, that year. And so what are you doing to help solve pain, to help them win new deals or get upsell, cross-sell, or retention, and enabling them with the right motions? And then it's about engaging them on an ongoing basis. So to your original question around how do you make this, a partnership successful in that regard, it's that individual contributor, team level alignment. And then you don't just want to show up every month and say, "Hey, have a new deal for me?" Like that's not a value added way of staying top. Eventually you're going to annoy them and you're going to get blacklisted. And so it's about creating what we call an engagement plan, where we very thoughtfully think about how am I going to, as a partner, interact with each member of this team in a value-added way? And what are those points of engagement? One, it could be account development work. Hey, give me your list of accounts. I'm going to go do some independent research. I'm going to come back to you and tell you what I think I found and different approaches, different ideas I have. That's one touch point. You can do monthly win wires. So as you might have a shared Slack channel, do a win wire, tag the reps that won, tag their managers. That's a really effective way to keep your brand top of mind. And it's a touch point that lets people know you still exist. And it's about just having them remember you. It's perpetual mind share is what you're really after as a partner. It could be asset drops. Hey, team, I got a new asset that it's really great for financial services. If you're trying to upsell this one product, here's the messaging, here's the asset you can copy, you can use. Go ahead and send it to this persona and you'll get great engagement. Like that's a value added way to go stay in touch with that rep by giving them something they can use in the field, just as a few examples.
Fantastic. Okay. And I want to cycle back to the qualification question again,
Sure.
because I think it's too important to miss. And so can I test this with you on a real deal?
Sure, let's do it.
So if you think of a deal that was perfectly qualified by your standards and still died in no decision at the end, what do you think was actually missing there? Was it discovery or something around whether it felt safe for them to move?
So we've actually discovered that in our own cycles, and it tends to be with founders and CEOs. So that's where we have the biggest no decision point. And what happens is it's usually a sub 150 employee company. I'm dealing directly with the CEO. They come on, we do discovery, and coming right out of discovery, we only need 30 minutes of discovery to architect a COSO program. It's really, really fast. But we do a very detailed business case coming out of that. Here's current state. Here's what the priorities are. Here's what you want to impact. Here's the pipeline I think we can produce by running these 3 programs. And like we do all that math for them and have them, battle test it. But I find that we've gotten so good at what we do that when we present something, it is very buttoned up. It's very like you can't poke holes. You can try to, but we objectively go through and craft. Like everything we do is very, very objective and data driven. And I find that CEOs and founders tend to move. They buy in real quickly. They're like, I like what this guy's saying. I can't poke holes in it, and then they disappear. And I find that so what we had to do in our cycles is we had to intentionally slow cycles down. So when we get on with a founder or CEO, we're not just moving quick discovery, business case presentation, and buy. We added a middle layer called a customer success planning session where we go through and say, hey, before we don't just let anybody just buy and sign up. Like what we what we want to do is like we before anybody signs a contract with us, we go and do a customer success planning session where we cover what we're going to do because we do 4 month pilots. What we're going to do, a 30, 60, 90-day plan, the activities, what's expected on both sides, how much time it's going to take from you and your team, and the outcomes at the end of each month. And I'm going to bring my delivery operations team so you get to meet the team. So that allowed me to kind of tap the brakes on cycles, insert something that gives them more confidence is that there's actual real people and process and operations and QA behind it. And that helped us with the no decisions.
So you've got a tight ICP,
Yep.
triggers, door openers, all that.
Yeah.
How do you tell the difference between a deal that's qualified for you and a deal where it's actually safe for them to decide and live with that decision 6, 12, 18, 24 months later?
In general, like for our own cycles, qualification and safety are almost the same thing for us because I think about that stuff, and that's why like we came up with pilots and tiny ways that people can dip their toe in the water to see early success, which makes them feel safer to commit to, longer engagements. So we've got to give them those outcomes like really, really early. Um, I think if we were to talk more generically, how do you tell the difference between, if I'm a rep at a big company and I've got a deal that's qualified on paper, I'm using MedPick or something like that, and like this deal is qualified on paper, but the buyer may not feel safe. Is how do you become, that's an interesting challenge. And I don't know if I have an answer right out of the gate for that because I always tend to get in the weeds and I want to get into specifics. I always I always think about buyer safety because they will make decisions based on emotions for sure. But it's situational for me. Is there a specific scenario you think you give me that would probably be easier for me?
Well, what I'm trying to establish is, are we taking enough time before we move towards the transactional side of the sale and before solutioning and before trying to prove credibility in order to discover what actually matters for the individual human being? The pressures that they're under from above, below, from their peers, from the customers, from their partners. And, if we think about, is this a good deal for us? Then our intent is projected out and it gets reflected back in the buyer being defensive. But if we ask, is it safe for them? And are we allowed, should we even be in this deal?
Yeah.
I think it changes the tone and the feel for the other person. Um, so it what I'm trying to get at is, how does our intent land with the buyer in such a way that they see us as their ally as opposed to either an adversary or an accomplice?
Um, So that is, for me, that is all about champion development. And when you've got a real true champion, like we just did a pilot with a very large CRM company, and I had a champion internally, and wasn't a higher up, but it's somebody that had some budget, some authority and influence within the organization. I took the time to invest in that champion around to, I meet with all kinds of different stakeholders, and that was a buying committee that was, probably 25 deep when I look at that particular deal. And when you've got a champion who's also a coach, you start learning about other stakeholders and their motivations, and what makes them feel safe. And I feel like, throughout a cycle like that, I want to continuously ask, where's the risk in this? And where's the risk? How's that going to be perceived by so and so internally? What do you think they're going to think? What's your gut? Because you know your organization better than I do. And that's how I typically, unearth or root out problems or challenges.
Well, I think you've touched on something really critical, which again is a massive takeaway for anyone listening today, which is that you have to understand what the risks are that are perceived. It doesn't matter whether they're even real. As
Correct.
long as they perceive it, it's real to them.
Yep.
And I think very few salespeople are even remotely aware or care about whether or not the buyer is putting themselves at risk. They're,
Yep.
they're trying very hard to operate in an environment that is often very hostile.
Yep.
They aren't certain about their own safety within the organization. They have to balance the requirements of a bunch of people, and there are competing interests competing for time, money, resource, attention. And then they have to take it, whatever your champion has been armed with, they have to take that to somebody else. So that's the second room. And I think very few people really think to the second or even the third room, which is the allocation committee. And the net result of that is that the deal dies in the second room or in the corridor. And we've got to create the conditions where they absolutely feel safe and we de risk taking our proposition internally because 80 to 90% of the sale happens without us being present in the internal conversations. So how do we prime our champions and the various owners of risk and process, etc., so that they can take that message unedited and for it to land as intended?
And to your point on that, when you've got that much that such a large portion of the decision being made when you're not in the room, that's usually my own qualifier for whether somebody is a supporter of ours or not. So no matter how many stakeholders are in the deal, I look at each stakeholder and ask myself honestly, if that person were in a room with their boss and I was not present, would they absolutely say, I recommend Forecastable? I am safe and I am going to put my job on the line and I'm going to commit and say that this is a thing that we should do. And if I get into my gut feeling like that's not the case, or maybe, then I probably have some more work to do with that stakeholder to make sure that answer is a clear yes.
So unfortunately, we're coming to time. I could talk to you for hours. So if you look back over your career in partnerships, what was your best mistake that you learned the most from?
Um, what mistake did I make that I learned the most from? Let's see. I feel like I made so many mistakes and I learned from all of them. I always say I never lose. I either win or I learn. It's one of those two things. Um, Partner selection is a big one. In partner selection is a big one. And this is a fear that a lot of reps have, and it's a fear that came to reality for me. And one point in my career, I was selling at the time. I was employed by Adobe, and I was a top seller for Marketo, and I was very partner friendly. I wanted partners in on all my deals because I viewed them as my eyes and ears after the deal closed. They're going to spot upsell, cross sell. They're going to spot things for me. I know when I bring them in, they're going to answer my phone calls when I need something from them. But one time I brought in a partner to a deal that also was an Eloqua implementer, and then in the background ended up, selling them on Eloqua versus selling them on Marketo, which is I brought them in for. And so just being cognizant of the partner's aspirations too can be really important when thinking about the deal. And I think that's a rare situation because most partners won't be dishonest like that. I mean, that partner, it's a bad thing to do. They got blacklisted from the entire enterprise sales team. And it's one VP that said, "Yep, we're never going to use that partner again." And they never got another deal from that entire sales organization. Like that's the short-sightedness of a partner like that. But that was a mistake I made by not thinking about or fully vetting a partner that I brought into a deal.
That's excellent. Okay. So I would say that I think one of the biggest mistakes I've made is not understanding the conflicting interests of the problem owner versus the outcome owner and not finding a way to bridge that. And often the sponsor is neither, or they may sit on one side or the other, but then generally not both. And understanding that dynamic is really key. I'd be curious what advice you'd give to someone like me.
So I actually have real life examples. That's something we run into all the time. In fact, so like a lot of times I mean, I started this business 8 years ago and I remember it was Q4 of 2022 and we did this big conference and we opened up, it was like over 70 opportunities. It was just like a wild Q4. And I was learning, we had just gotten into the partnership space and I was very excited about opening these opportunities we closed literally zero of them. Because I learned the hard lesson that most partnership professionals they don't have budget, they have very little authority, and they have very little influence within the organization. And so for me, even though they've got to your point, like they're maybe the problem owner, the outcome owner is the sales leader who needs to hit quota. And those two very, very rarely talk. And the sales leader views partnerships as fluffy. They don't really want to spend any time on it. And the partnerships people tend to be very afraid of the sales organization. Like I don't want to bring them anything. I'm afraid they're going to yell at me. Kind of an attitude that I feel a lot of these folks have. And so we made it very easy to bridge those two by saying, hey, to get those two people in a room, the problem owner and the outcome owner, by saying, hey, we're going to go develop a co-sell playbook that's going to help reps win in this particular, area. Here's the pipeline we're expecting. Which sales leader would have an opinion on how the reps, are engaged in this process, or who has the most skin in the game if we were to have success here, so we can get some feedback from them before we deploy something to the field. And that allows me to get multi-threaded. The sales leader always says yes to giving feedback on what the reps are going to be doing. And we essentially put those two departments together very intentionally. And that's what gets our deals done. And all of a sudden we have somebody with the outcome owner in the room. They love it. They want to move forward. Budget appears out of nowhere because now you're impacting sales. And that's just how we've done it.
Interesting. I was having a conversation recently where a RevOps person was trying to work out what they were going to do with a sales kickoff. And what was interesting was the rep was trying to sell them a solution.
Yeah.
But what they failed to understand was that the reason for bringing in an outside influence was different for the CRO, for the VP of RevOps, for the sales organization, for management, for the board. Yeah,
Yeah.
the CRO was under pressure because the company had recently been effectively taken over with a majority stakeholding. And the net result of that was they were under scrutiny for ensuring that the pipeline and the forecast were accurate.
Yeah.
And they were trying to keep their job by satisfying the new owners and the board.
Yeah.
The head of RevOps was trying to demonstrate that they were actually adding value. The operators wanted to make their number.
Yeah.
The managers wanted to ensure that the number of the team was hit.
Yep.
And all of these conflicting jobs needed to be satisfied.
Yep.
But the rep was going in on the basis of, we have this widget and we can help you solve this kind of problem. And
Yep.
very often we see this where they lead with product. So let's finish on this bugbear. Demos. What is the purpose of a demo, and when should you not use them? And
I
for
would
what
say
reason should you not use them?
I would say not use them most of the time. Like demos very rarely push a deal forward in any material way. It's like in fact, like we started out life as a SaaS company here at Forecastable. We're not just pure professional services, and I realized that nobody knew what the heck to do with the technology because I thought I was solving all the world's co-sell problems with this tech. Nobody knew what to do with it, and so we created a service, and then we now use the technology for internal delivery. Now, of course, people end up adopting the technology, eventually because they start using it every single day. But we don't even really talk about the technology in our cycles because it introduces this immediate. A tech buy is very different, and people are. I feel like now buyers don't want to buy new anything. Like there's so many tools to go and buy. The last thing they want to do is get caught in a sales cycle and have to champion something. And the tech buys are really, really hard. So I downplay our own technology and don't even get into demos. They say, yeah, we use it internally, and if you want to log into it sometime, you can. But you'll decide that when we're working together. So we don't go through any information security reviews. We don't go through a lot of different things because of that. Now, to your point, like in general for demos, I think once you've given a demo, like the buyer is now locked in their minds, their view of you. And if you just give a demo early, like you've answered a bunch of curiosities. They may ghost you, they may do this and that. I would save a demo for the absolute last thing you possibly do because you want to gather as much stakeholder information as possible. To your point, what does the CFO care about? What does the head of sales care about? What does RevOps care about? And will a functional demo help them make their decision in any way, shape, or form or influence them? And if the answer is no, then maybe you don't do a demo for that stakeholder. But I wouldn't. A demo should be a checkbox item, not a selling point, in my opinion.
If you're going to do a demo early, it needs to be used for discovery, not to try and gain credibility. And I agree with you. It should really be to confirm the order, not to try and sell.
Correct. It's feature function very rarely sells. It just doesn't.
As a buyer, it's never sold me.
No.
And I think salespeople would probably do well by putting themselves in the buyer's shoes. They've all been buyers. Why they think that what they're doing in sales will work on another human being, when if the boot was on the other foot, they'd run a mile.
Correct. And actually, I've got a real life situation on that. We have our number one partner is a company called Crossbeam, and they have 30,000-ish customers, all this stuff. And when I get into a cycle and they're questioning Crossbeam, like I want to see a demo of Crossbeam. I'm like, what? A demo is not going to get you anything. You're not going to learn anything that's going to change your decision. Crossbeam is table stakes. You either if you don't have the data from your partners, it's very difficult to scale the program. So like I try to push people away from demos because it's just a waste of time, especially if it's a known vendor. And like we know the tech works. If you want to see something just to check a box to validate very specific requirements as part of an RFP, sure. But it shouldn't. It very rarely pushes the needle forward.
Alex, we've come to time. How can people get hold of you?
Sure, they can find me on LinkedIn. So that's probably the best way. Or go to forecastable.com and check out. We've got published pricing. We get very specific on the use cases that we cover, and that's the best way to reach me and learn more.
Alex Buckles, thank you.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me, Marcus.
My pleasure. So this is Marcus Cauchi signing off once again from the Inquisitor podcast. We started out with the fantasy of partnerships and ended up in the real work: distribution, co-sell, playbooks, and buyer safety. And two things stand out for me. First of all, Alex's discipline about building into clear gaps in the market and treating partners as the door, not an afterthought. And second, how you bridge the problem owner and the outcome owner so that the person with the pain is not left selling this alone internally. And for anyone listening, quick self-check. In your biggest deals or partner motions, do you actually know who owns the problem, who owns the outcome, and who would really say yes for you in the second room when you're not there? And are your partners set up to help with that, or are they just another logo on your slide? So with that, thank you, happy selling, stay safe, bye-bye.